If you ever caught even a glimpse of how truly set apart you are, you'd stop explaining yourself mid-sentence and just walk away like the closing credits of a legendary film. That's not arrogance, that's accuracy. Because the truth is, most people aren't confused by you, they're overwhelmed by you, they're not misunderstanding you, they're underestimating themselves. When someone's worldview is held together with fragile tape and borrowed confidence, your clarity feels like an earthquake they didn't sign up for, and instead of admitting, wow, this person sees life through a higher lens, they'll act like you're the one talking in riddles, even when you're explaining something as simple as, relax, I said what I said. Here's a psychological fact. The human brain rejects anything that forces it to grow too quickly. That means when you show up with insight, depth, awareness, and a spirit that refuses to shrink, some people's minds literally push back. Not because you're wrong, but because your truth stretches places they've never exercised. And the funniest part? Some of these same people will later take your message, water it down, and repost it on social media like they discovered fire. But this is why being set apart comes with its own kind of humor. The universe will let you watch people pretend not to understand you, only for them to quote you weeks later like it's original research. Meanwhile, you're standing there like, wow, so now my thoughts are trending? When you're chosen, marked, spiritually distinguished, or simply cut from a fabric most people don't have access to, explanations become a luxury you can no longer afford. Your life moves at a velocity they can't track. Your insights hit depths they don't swim in, and your evolution exposes chapters they haven't even opened. You're not meant to explain yourself. You're meant to become the moment that forces people to rethink everything they thought they knew. Not through debate, not through justification, through presence, through essence, through that quiet, undeniable something that makes people whisper about you when you leave the room. So today, we're diving into the reality behind this truth. If you saw how truly set apart you are, you'd never waste another breath explaining yourself. Not out of pride, not out of ego, but because explanations are for equals, and you were never standing among them in the first place. Number 1. If you saw how rare your perspective is, you'd stop explaining to people who only argue from limitation. Most people don't reject your ideas because they're deep, complex, or hard to understand. They reject them because your ideas challenge the limits they've built their entire identity around. When someone has spent years defending the four walls of their comfort zone, anything that expands beyond those walls feels dangerous. They're not debating you because they want clarity. They're debating you because growth terrifies them. They're not confused. They're protecting their boundaries, and not the good kind, the type of boundaries built from fear, insecurity, and a lifetime of settling for good enough. When you speak from a higher perspective, you're speaking from experience, awareness, and maturity that wasn't handed to you. It was earned. Meanwhile, some people talk from places they've never questioned. They inherited their beliefs, picked up their mindset from their environment, and never tested any of it. So when you bring a viewpoint that didn't come from survival mode or imitation, they can't receive it. Your clarity feels like a threat to the reality they've been holding on to like a security blanket. This is why explaining yourself to certain people leaves you feeling drained, unseen, or even slightly annoyed. You're trying to pour ocean water insight into a cup-sized mind that only understands what fits its capacity. The mismatch will always feel like resistance. And here's the wild part. Even when you break things down for them in the simplest way, they still twist it, reject it, or argue with it. Not because you're wrong, but because they don't want to expand. Growth requires effort. Protecting limitation is easier. The rarest thing about you is that you don't speak from ego, competition, or insecurity. You speak from awareness. You speak from pattern recognition. You speak from lessons learned the hard way. Your perspective is shaped by experiences that broke you open, not kept you small. That alone puts you in a different category. Once you truly understand how uncommon your lens is, you stop explaining yourself to people who never intended to understand you in the first place. You conserve your energy. You recognize what conversations are worth your presence. And you finally accept that some people argue from limitation, not from logic, not from truth, and certainly not from wisdom. They're not rejecting your perspective. They're rejecting the growth required to meet you where you are. Number 2. If you saw how many people study you quietly, you'd stop trying to clarify yourself to the loud ones. The loudest people in your life are rarely the ones who truly understand you. They're the ones who react quickly, judge quickly, criticize quickly, and talk the most, all because they can't handle the depth of who you are. But while they make noise on the surface, there are others watching you in silence, taking in everything you do with full attention. These quiet observers don't jump in with opinions or arguments. They watch, they listen, and they learn. They see the value in you long before anyone else admits it. There's something about your presence, your choices, your resilience, or your perspective that pulls people in, even if they never say a word. They don't clap, they don't comment, and they don't announce themselves. But they're paying attention. And the irony is that the loud people, the ones you feel pressured to explain yourself to, are usually the ones who aren't even trying to understand. They're too focused on reacting to truly hear you. Some people study you because your life teaches them things theirs never has. They learn from how you handle pressure, how you stay calm in chaos, how you bounce back after setbacks, and how you carry yourself even when nobody is cheering. They see strength in you that you don't always see in yourself. They see clarity in you that helps them make better decisions in their own lives. And they see authenticity in you that quietly inspires them to level up. But you often don't notice these silent learners because they don't announce their admiration. Instead, you get distracted by the loud ones who misunderstand you, interrupt you, or try to argue their way into being right. They drain your energy while the quiet ones value it. They question your motives while the quiet ones respect your intention. They challenge your identity while the quiet ones grow from it. The truth is, you don't owe explanations to people who only listen to respond. Your voice is not meant to be wasted on those who treat your truth like a debate. Once you realize how many people silently benefit from your existence, you stop trying to convince the ones who choose not to see you. You start speaking for clarity, not approval. You start living for purpose, not validation. And you learn to embrace the quiet impact you're making, the kind that changes lives without ever asking for applause. Number 3. If you saw the spiritual weight your presence carries, you'd understand why people pretend not to understand you. There are people who grasp exactly who you are, but they'll never admit it because acknowledging your depth would force them to acknowledge their own lack of growth. It's not that your words are complicated. It's that your presence carries a kind of truth they're not ready to face. You walk into a room with a grounded energy, a certain awareness, a certain stillness, and it unsettles people who rely on noise, ego, and performance to feel significant. They sense something in you that exposes what's missing in them, so they hide behind confusion as an excuse. Some people pretend not to understand you because understanding you would mean they must respect you. And for some, that's too big of a step. They'd rather downplay your insight than admit you're operating on a level they can't reach yet. They turn your clarity into questions, your confidence into arrogance, and your simplicity into complexity. Not because they don't get it, but because your presence forces an internal confrontation they don't want to have. The truth is, when someone with real spiritual weight speaks, It's not just the words that hit, it's the energy behind them. Your presence carries history, transformation, scars, lessons, and victories you never brag about. People can feel that even if they can't explain it. They can sense the authority you walk with, the strength you've built, and the wisdom you've earned. And instead of acknowledging that, they shrink into pretending they don't get you. Your presence also disrupts illusions. People who survive on manipulation, gossip, control, or superficial confidence struggle around people who see through things quickly. You don't have to say much. You don't have to expose them. Your very existence makes their masks uncomfortable, and when people feel threatened in this way, they act confused, dismissive, or overly critical, anything that keeps them from admitting they're intimidated. Pretending not to understand you is a defense mechanism. It protects their pride. It shields their insecurities. It keeps them from facing the truth about themselves. But none of that has anything to do with you. It's never been about your clarity. It's been about their capacity. Once you see the weight your presence carries, you stop explaining yourself to people who are pretending not to understand. You start saving your energy for those who listen with openness, not resistance. And you finally accept that some people don't misunderstand you. They fear you. Number 4. If you saw the prophecy embedded in your life story, you'd realize explanations cheapen your path. There are people who look at their life as a straight line, point A to point B, things happening randomly, events unfolding by chance. But your life never worked like that. Nothing you've survived, learned, lost, or walked away from has been random. There's a deeper rhythm underneath your timeline that most people cannot recognize because they're only looking at the surface. You're not just living, you're unfolding. Every chapter has echoed something bigger than the moment itself, pointing you toward who you were destined to become long before you knew there was a destination. The things that broke you weren't failures, they were alignments. The people who left weren't losses, they were releases. The delays weren't punishments, they were protection. These aren't cute phrases, they're spiritual architecture. Your life has repeated certain themes, certain battles, certain awakenings, not because you're unlucky, but because you're being shaped for something that requires a different level of understanding. And if someone doesn't have that spiritual sensitivity, there's no amount of explaining that will ever make sense to them. People who can only comprehend life logically will always think your journey is dramatic, exaggerated, or too deep. They don't understand that some people are born to live stories that carry messages. Some people walk through things that are meant to wake others up. Some people go through spiritual pruning, spiritual stretching, and spiritual rebuilding because their lives will eventually serve as evidence for something bigger. That's not everyone's path, and that's exactly why not everyone can understand yours. When you try to explain your experiences to people who've never dealt with inner transformation, they'll minimize you. When you try to explain your intuition to people who only trust what they can physically see, they'll doubt you. When you try to explain your purpose to people who are only trying to survive day to day, they'll label you strange or intense. And the sad truth: some people do understand you, but admitting it would force them to question their own choices, so they pretend not to see the depth you walk with. The prophecy woven into your life story cannot be understood by everyone, and it was never supposed to be. Some people read life like a sentence. You read it like scripture. Some live for logic. You live through alignment. That difference alone makes explanations feel like you're shrinking your soul to fit a space it was never meant to occupy. Number 5. If you saw how many people copy you behind closed doors, your need to explain would evaporate. The funny thing about being set apart is that the people who act uninterested on the surface are often the ones studying you the most. They won't like your posts in public, they won't acknowledge your growth, and they definitely won't compliment your ideas. But you'll see pieces of yourself showing up in their behavior, their language, and even their decisions. They mimic your tone, repeat your sayings, borrow your confidence, and repackage your originality as if they discovered it on their own. It's almost comical how someone can pretend not to understand you in conversation, but later be caught speaking with the same insight you were ridiculed for. But this is what happens when you're operating from authenticity. People who haven't built their own identity lean on people who have. Your originality becomes their blueprint. Your courage becomes their example. Your evolution becomes their instruction manual. And because they don't have the humility to admit they're learning from you, they'll hide it like it's a crime. They'll claim coincidence or inspiration from somewhere, anywhere but you. Because acknowledging you would expose the truth about where their ideas came from. When you recognize this dynamic, your urge to explain yourself fades naturally. You stop trying to convince people who only listen for the sake of imitation. You stop over-communicating to people who pretend not to notice you, yet secretly rely on you to shape their next move. And you start to see that your influence doesn't need to be validated publicly to be real. There are people who study you to improve. There are people who study you to compete. And there are people who study you because you offer a sense of direction they can't find within themselves. Regardless of their reasons, the common thread is that they're looking to you. They may not admit it. They may not clap for you. They may even downplay you in front of others, but they're quietly tracking your evolution like it's a personal guide. Once you grasp how many lives you quietly shape, how many people borrow your creativity, your resilience, your mindset, and your style, explaining yourself starts to feel unnecessary. Because deep down, you realize they already understand you more than they'll ever confess. They understand you so well, in fact, they're trying to become pieces of you. And you don't explain yourself to people who already know exactly who you are, even if they pretend not to. Number 6. If you saw how deeply you trigger people's unresolved wounds, you'd understand why they distort your intentions. A lot of the reactions you get from people have nothing to do with what you said or did. They're reacting to the parts of themselves they've been avoiding for years. Your presence has a way of stirring emotions they've buried, insecurities they've ignored, and traumas they've never confronted. You walk into their life with honesty, clarity, and directness. And suddenly the things they thought they had under control start rising to the surface. They feel exposed, not because you exposed them, but because their soul recognizes something in you that forces a level of truth they've never dealt with. Some people spend their whole lives avoiding self-reflection. They avoid accountability. They avoid growth. They avoid anything that threatens their carefully managed self-image. Then you show up. Someone who doesn't flinch at truth, someone who sees through pretenses, someone who has done the inner work, and it shakes them. You become the mirror they never wanted to look into. And looking in that mirror is uncomfortable, so instead of admitting, "This person is showing me something about myself," they turn it into, "This person is wrong, rude, confusing, or too much." People who haven't dealt with their wounds interpret everything through the lens of their pain. A simple statement becomes an insult. A boundary becomes rejection. Your confidence becomes arrogance. Your honesty becomes an attack. It's not because your intentions are off. It's because their perception is broken in places they haven't healed. You can explain yourself 100 times, but if someone is listening through decades of unresolved hurt, they will twist your meaning every single time. The irony is that many of the people who misunderstand you are actually hungry for the truth you carry. Deep down, they know you're reflecting something they need to confront, but facing it feels too raw. So they push you away, question your character, or rewrite your intentions so they don't have to face themselves. It's self-protection, disguised as criticism. Once you understand this, you stop taking their reactions personally. You stop trying to correct their assumptions. You stop bending over backward to prove you meant well. You begin to see their responses as emotional reflexes, not accurate judgments of who you are. Mirrors don't explain what they reflect. They simply show what exists. And when you realize you're that kind of mirror, you stop trying to convince people who are not yet ready to face their own reflection. Number 7. If you saw the level of spiritual protection on your life, you'd stop arguing with people who don't even have access to you. There is a reason some people can talk about you, guess about you, judge you, or assume things about you, but can never actually reach you. They can observe from a distance, but they can't touch the core of who you are. They can form opinions, but they can't influence your spirit. They can speculate, but they can't understand. And that isn't because you're hard to figure out. It's because they're trying to interpret a life they were never spiritually cleared to step into. You carry a level of protection that goes beyond logic. It's not just emotional boundaries or personal discipline. It's something placed over your life that prevents the wrong people from getting too close, too deep, or too comfortable. Even when you tried to let certain people in, something always blocked it. The connection fell apart, the energy felt off, the intentions revealed themselves, or the access broke down before it could become dangerous. That wasn't coincidence. That was preservation. People with limited awareness want to understand you with tools that can't handle your complexity. They try to read you using their assumptions, their wounds, their ego, or their surface-level thinking. And no matter how hard they try, they keep coming up short because your spirit operates on a wavelength they haven't grown into. Understanding you requires maturity, humility, and spiritual development. Things not everyone is willing to cultivate. So they stand outside your life like tourists staring at a locked gate, trying to describe what's inside based on what little they think they see. And here's the thing. When someone doesn't have access to your inner world, their interpretation will always be wrong. They will fill in the gaps with their insecurities. They will project their fears onto your silence. They will judge your actions through the lens of their limitations. You could explain yourself for hours and still not break through their perception, because the barrier isn't communication. It's consciousness. You can't speak to someone on a level they haven't unlocked. The moment you recognize that some people simply aren't allowed past your spiritual perimeter, you stop wasting time arguing, clarifying, or defending yourself. You realize that some misunderstandings are intentional safeguards, some disconnects are divine redirections, some distances are protection, not rejection. Not everyone is meant to understand you, not everyone is meant to walk with you, and not everyone is meant to access the parts of you that were reserved for people on your level. Once you truly see how protected you are, you stop fighting battles that were never yours to fight. You let the gate stay closed, and you keep walking. Number 8. If you saw how much your silence exposes people, you'd stop filling it with explanations. Your silence does more work than your words ever will. When you choose not to explain, justify, or defend yourself, people begin to show you who they really are. The moment you stop guiding the narrative, they start filling in the blanks with whatever lives inside them. And that's where the truth comes out. Your silence isn't empty. It's revealing. It forces people to operate without your influence, without your clarity, without your direction. And that's when their motives become undeniable. Some people rely on your explanations to hide behind. As long as you're talking, they can pretend they didn't understand, or misheard, or needed more context. But the second you go quiet, the mask slips. Their discomfort rises. Their true feelings start leaking out through their tone, their reactions, their sudden distance, or their sudden intensity. Silence exposes what talking would have covered up. Your quietness acts like a spiritual scanner. It picks up insecurity quickly, because insecure people cannot handle being left alone with their thoughts, especially when those thoughts involve you. It exposes manipulators because manipulators need your words to twist, flip, and distort. It exposes jealous people because jealous people rely on constant information about you to feel superior or in control. Take that away, and they reveal their resentment without even trying. It exposes those who truly care, because genuine people don't panic when communication slows. They stay grounded and respectful. People reveal more in your silence than in your conversations. They'll start projecting motives onto you that you never had. They'll start assuming things that reflect their wounds, not your intentions. They'll start acting out based on stories they created in their own heads. And all of this happens because your silence forces them to confront the reality of their own character. Some can handle it, many cannot. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop shielding people from the truth of who they are. You give them the space to expose their impatience, their entitlement, their fear, or their respect, whatever lies beneath. And the more you witness this, the more you realize silence is not passive. It's powerful. It clarifies relationships. It reveals loyalties. It exposes enemies. It confirms allies. It shows who's rooted and who's rattled. Once you understand how much your silence uncovers, you lose the desire to over-explain. You stop filling the air with reasons. You stop rescuing people from their own reactions. You let silence do the sorting, because it always does, and it never lies. Number 9. If you saw how many blessings are waiting on the other side of detachment, you'd never justify your value to anyone again. People think detachment is coldness, but for chosen ones, it's clarity. It's spiritual hygiene. It's what happens when your soul refuses to negotiate with anything beneath its assignment. Every time you explain yourself to someone who lacks the capacity to understand you, you shrink a little, you dim a little, you leak power. Explaining yourself isn't communication, it's bondage. It ties you to old versions of you that you outgrew long ago and to people whose lenses were never clean enough to see you accurately. You don't elevate by being understood. You elevate by being aligned. Detachment is not abandonment, it's graduation. It's the moment your spirit says, I refuse to sit in rooms where my presence has to be justified. Because the truth is, your next blessings have been suffocating under the weight of misplaced loyalty. Blessings can't thrive where confusion is constantly being fed. Elevation cannot land where the energy is diluted. The blessings waiting for you are not small. They are kingdom-sized. They require a level of mental, emotional, and spiritual spaciousness that misaligned relationships simply cannot coexist with. You cannot carry divine abundance while dragging people who only understand you halfway. Your destiny is allergic to partial comprehension. Misalignment feels like confusion. Misalignment feels like heaviness. Misalignment feels like you're giving CPR to situations God has already pronounced dead. But once you detach, the air changes. The frequency rises. You start attracting people who don't just tolerate your depth, they resonate with it. They don't just get you. They reflect the same light you carry. The moment you stop explaining your worth, you step into environments where your worth speaks for itself. The moment you detach from what drains you, what belongs to you begins rushing in. Your blessings are not lost. They're just waiting for you to put down what was never yours to carry. Your next level is not asking you to fight harder. It's asking you to release faster. Number 10. If you saw how your destiny threatens stagnant people, you'd stop wasting breath trying to be understood by them. Some people aren't confused by you. They're confronted by you. They're not misreading your intentions. They're resisting the spiritual reminder you represent. You are living proof that evolution is possible, that excuses are optional, and that staying stuck is a choice. Your existence disrupts their comfort zone, and human beings will always attack what disturbs the place they've chosen to settle. People who never grew cannot accept someone who did. They spent years building identities around limitations, fear, and procrastination. And then you walked in with your purpose, your resilience, your growth, and suddenly their excuses don't fit anymore. Your elevation pulls the mask off their stagnation. Your progress puts pressure on their complacency. You invalidate their entire belief system simply by taking steps forward. It's not your purpose they dislike. It's the accountability your presence forces them to face. You become a mirror they didn't ask for, and instead of analyzing their reflection, they try to break the mirror. That's why every explanation you offer sounds like arrogance to someone who has no intention of evolving. Your clarity is offensive to people who thrive on confusion. Your discipline is insulting to those committed to shortcuts. Your destiny is threatening to people who've convinced themselves that where they are is all they will ever be. They don't misunderstand your journey. They understand it perfectly. And that's the problem. They can feel that you're going somewhere they cannot follow. They sense doors opening for you that remain locked for them. They know your growth is not a phase, it's a calling. And the more you rise, the more their insecurity interprets your elevation as an attack. Your purpose didn't offend them. Their stagnation did. Chosen ones don't trigger people by speaking. They trigger people by becoming. You don't need to argue, defend, convince, or negotiate. Your destiny is already speaking loud enough. Your evolution is already proof enough. Your progress is already a sermon. When you've outgrown people, there is nothing you can say that will make them hear you correctly. Your job is not to be understood by the stagnant. Your job is to keep growing until the only ones who can stand beside you are the ones who are growing too. Number 11. If you saw how many doors open simply because of who you are, not what you explain, you'd protect your energy like treasure. There are people who think influence comes from speaking, but yours comes from existing. Your presence carries something that can't be rehearsed, replicated, or reasoned with. It's an invisible authority, an inner weight that makes rooms adjust themselves the moment you step inside. You don't have to justify your decisions, your standards, or your spiritual depth, because the very atmosphere knows how to respond to you even when people pretend they don't. Your identity is a key. Not the identity you perform for the world, but the one that has been shaped through fire, isolation, warfare, resilience, and evolution. Doors respond to that kind of identity. Opportunities recognize the frequency of someone who has earned their wisdom. Favor is attracted to those who've survived storms without losing their inner compass. You don't need to explain why you move differently. Your journey already carved the authority into your presence. Your spirit carries a signature, a vibration that can't be forged. People feel it before they understand it. They feel safer, more alert, more respectful, or more intimidated without knowing why. That reaction isn't about your words. It's about the spiritual blueprint you carry. Your energy announces you long before you introduce yourself, and when you start explaining, justifying, clarifying, or overtalking, you dilute that signature. You dim the very thing that separates you from the crowd. Rooms shift when you enter them, not when you talk. The atmosphere recognizes alignment before humans do. Spiritual realms respond before physical ones catch up. That's why certain doors swing open without effort, not because you convinced anyone, but because your presence alone authenticated you. You were chosen in realms people can't even access, so their misunderstandings can't change what's already written. Explaining yourself is a slow leak. It drains your power, your mystery, your discernment, and your spiritual authority. Every time you over-explain, you hand people access they didn't earn. You give them a flashlight into places of your soul that were meant to stay sacred. Your energy is treasure, not a brochure. The moment you start treating it that way, you'll realize you never needed people to get you to begin with. The doors meant for you already do. Number 12. If you saw how much your authenticity intimidates artificial people, you'd stop trying to make them get you. There's a specific discomfort your presence creates, and it has nothing to do with arrogance or misunderstanding. It's the uneasiness that surfaces when someone who lives behind filters, facades, and carefully crafted personas encounters someone who is simply real. Your authenticity disrupts their performance. It strips away the masks they rely on. It exposes the difference between being genuine and being rehearsed, and that contrast unsettles people who survive on imitation. You represent everything they pretend to be. While they fabricate confidence, you embody it. While they practice charisma, you radiate it without effort. While they collect personas like outfits, yours grew from scars, lessons, and internal evolution. They aren't threatened because you're doing too much. They're threatened because you don't have to do anything for people to recognize your depth. Artificial people are committed to maintaining illusions, and your very existence is a spotlight they never asked for. They don't dislike your truth as much as they dislike that they can't duplicate your origin story. They can copy your style, your language, your tone, even your attitude, but they can't replicate the soil you grew from. They can't counterfeit the pain that built your resilience or the spiritual pressure that shaped your discernment. It's not your personality they envy. It's your authentic beginning, the kind that can't be purchased, rehearsed, or mimicked. That's why explaining yourself to them goes nowhere. They're not confused, they're competing. They understand you just fine, too well, actually. Their goal isn't clarity, it's control. If they can convince you that you need to justify your identity, they can shrink you into a frame that makes them comfortable. They want to level the playing field by making you doubt the very qualities that set you apart. But authenticity isn't something you break down into bite-sized explanations. It's something people either recognize or run from. And the ones who run aren't avoiding you. They're avoiding the parts of themselves your realness exposes. When someone is committed to the mask, honesty feels like an attack. Your authenticity has already spoken louder than any explanation ever could. Let it keep doing the talking. You were never meant to be understood by people who are still trying to assemble themselves. Number 13. If you saw how many people pray for clarity while you are clarity, you'd realize explanations only dim your light. There are people who spend years asking God, the universe, ancestors, or whatever they believe in for direction, for confirmation, for a sign, and then you walk into their life carrying the very insight they've been begging for. Your presence alone brings alignment. Your words rearrange confusion. Your decisions expose truth. You operate like a human compass without even trying. And the irony is that while people are searching for clarity in every corner of their lives, they become intimidated when that clarity shows up in the form of a person, especially one who isn't trying to impress them. You're not meant to fit into their understanding. You're meant to stretch it. Your existence challenges definitions, limitations, and assumptions. You force people to rethink what they thought they knew, not by arguing or explaining, but by simply living in the fullness of who you are. That kind of presence disrupts comfort zones. It calls people higher. It pushes them past their excuses. But elevating someone's mind doesn't always feel pleasant to them. Sometimes it feels like resistance, irritation, or intimidation. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you expose how low they've been thinking. When you explain yourself, you shrink your frequency. You compress your depth into something small enough for people who haven't grown yet. You make your insight sound like common sense, just so they won't feel overwhelmed. You water down your intuition so it fits their limited logic. You translate spiritual understanding into human language until it loses its weight. And the truth is, every time you do that, you dim a part of yourself, not because you're wrong, but because they aren't ready. But you were never designed to be digestible. You were designed to be disruptive. Not destructive, but disruptive in the sense that your life shifts atmospheres. You break patterns. You interrupt generational cycles. You introduce higher thinking. You awaken dormant hunger in people who are sleepwalking through their lives. Clarity doesn't whisper. Clarity rearranges. And that's what you do. Not by force, but by being aligned, aware, and spiritually tuned in. So if people misunderstand you, that's not a sign to explain. It's a sign that you're operating on a different wavelength. Clarity doesn't slow itself down to be accepted. It stays bright, and everything around it eventually adjusts. Number 14. If you saw who you become when you stop explaining, you'd understand that explanations are the last chains keeping you small. There is a version of you that you haven't fully met yet. Not because you're unprepared, but because you've been too busy translating yourself for people who were never meant to access your depth. Every explanation you give becomes a tiny negotiation with your own power. Every justification becomes a quiet permission slip for someone to question what was never up for debate. Explanations don't just drain your energy, they shrink your identity. They make you hold back the parts of yourself that were designed to operate at full voltage. The moment you stop justifying your existence, something shifts internally. You stop bending your truth to make it more acceptable. You stop trimming your light to make it less intimidating. You stop rehearsing your intentions to avoid being misunderstood. And with that release comes a transformation. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. You step into the version of yourself that was always waiting beneath the noise. The sovereign version. The version that moves from self-recognition instead of seeking outside validation. The version that doesn't chase clarity because you are clarity. This unbothered version of you doesn't argue with misinterpretations. They don't chase approval. They don't perform. They don't shrink. They simply lead, naturally, effortlessly, unmistakably. They influence without trying, inspire without explaining, and shift environments without saying a word. Leadership for them is not a role, it's a frequency. It's something people feel before they understand. And the moment you stop explaining, you rise into that frequency like you were born for it. This elevated version of you is uncontaminated by other people's projections. They don't carry the weight of proving anything. They don't feel tied to old identities. They don't second-guess the path they know they're called to walk. They stand tall in their truth, even when standing alone means stepping away from everything familiar. Isolation stops feeling like a punishment and starts feeling like alignment. Solitude becomes expansion. Silence becomes power. And that final version, the one that stands alone without fear, is the truest form of you. The one that doesn't need to be explained, diluted, softened, or reorganized to fit anyone else's understanding. The one that walks into their destiny without asking for permission or offering commentary. You were never meant to be small. You were just over-explaining. At the end of the day, everything you've ever wrestled with, the misunderstandings, the strange reactions, the silent envy, the spiritual resistance, the hidden imitation, the intense expectations, all of it was pointing to one truth. You were never meant to live at the level where explanations are required. You were built for higher rooms, deeper conversations, and spiritual dimensions that most people will never experience, let alone comprehend. Trying to explain yourself to those who can't perceive you has been the only thing slowing you down, and you're finally stepping out of that cycle. Your clarity has always been too loud for those who only understand noise. Your authenticity has always been too raw for those who perform identity. Your presence has always been too impactful for those who rely on pretense. Your silence has always been too revealing for those who survive on illusions. Your destiny has always been too expansive for those who chose stagnation. Every point you've heard today is a reminder of what you already carry. A frequency that shifts environments, a presence that opens doors, an origin that can't be copied, and a path that functions like prophecy. You were designed to stretch people's understanding, not fit inside it. You were designed to lead without convincing, shine without apologizing, and walk without seeking permission. The version of you that emerges when you stop explaining is the version your destiny has been waiting for, unfiltered, unbothered, uncontaminated, and undeniable. This is your moment to release every chain made of "let me explain" and step fully into the identity that has been speaking louder than your words long before you realized it. You are clarity, you are direction, you are depth, and you are elevation wrapped in a human form. Anyone who cannot understand you is simply not assigned to you, and that truth should set you free, not make you shrink. If this message resonated with you, don't leave without supporting the channel. Make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, drop a powerful comment, and share this video with someone who needs this reminder today. Your support helps this message reach more people who are awakening to the truth of who they are. Until next time, walk in your power. You've earned it. God bless you.